Sometimes a moment is so loud it achieves perfect silence. The world stops. The air crackles. The molecules in the room rearrange themselves. It's not just an entrance. It's a rupture. You could feel it in the air. Chills, chaos, and the loudest pop of the year. Her return just broke SmackDown history. But this wasn't the return of a beloved champion. This wasn't a Hall of Famer coming home for one last match. This was something far more complicated. This was the return of a ghost. The one who walked away. The one who looked at the entire empire at the peak of her power and said, "No more." She had been gone for 7 years. Not injured. Not fired. She had simply vanished. She had broken the cardinal rule of the business. You don't leave the spotlight. You don't abandon the throne. And now, she was back, standing in the center of the ring, bathed in that impossible blue light, as 20,000 people lost their collective minds. The sound wasn't just joy. It was confusion. It was anger. It was validation. It was the sound of a 7-year-old question finally, violently being answered. You have to understand what that sound meant. It wasn't just cheering. It was pressure escaping a fault line. The lights had gone out, a common tactic. The crowd expected a surprise, perhaps a legend, or a new face from the developmental brand. Instead, they heard a single, haunting chord. A sound that hadn't been heard in arenas for nearly a decade. A silence fell. Not a quiet silence, but a heavy, electric vacuum. 20,000 people held their breath. And when the lights snapped back on, there she was. The pop that followed wasn't human. It was elemental. It was the sound of 1,000,000 digital arguments, 1,000 what-if articles, and a decade of restless fan theories, all culminating in a single, deafening physical roar. The air didn't just crackle, it tore. The broadcast feed peaked, the audio turning to white noise as the commentators, seasoned professionals, simply ripped their headphones off, their faces a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. They weren't just watching a return, they were watching a violation of reality. Fans in the front row were weeping, not cheering, weeping. Because the one who was never supposed to come back, the one they had been told to forget, was home. She didn't move. She didn't wave, or play to the crowd, or signal for a microphone. She just stood. In the center of the ring, the current women's champion, sweaty and exhausted from the brutal match she'd just won, froze mid-celebration. The champion's music, a triumphant anthem just seconds before, died. The champion's confusion morphed, live on camera, into sheer, unfiltered disbelief, then into a cold, professional rage. This was her moment. This was her ring. This was the era she had built from the ashes of the one who left. And now, the ghost was back to reclaim the house. The champion held her title belt in the air, a desperate gesture, shouting words that no one could hear over the din. The woman from the past didn't even look at the championship. She just tilted her head, a fraction of a movement that felt seismic. It was a look of profound, unsettling pity, as if the champion, the belt, the entire billion-dollar spectacle was just a minor inconvenience. The show crashed to a commercial break, not with a bang, but with that terrible, quiet stare. The pop was the shock, the silence that followed. That was the threat. The moment the broadcast cut, the real arena lit up. Not the building, but the one we all carry in our pockets. The internet didn't just break, it evaporated. The platform, formerly known as Twitter, ceased to function, buckling under a traffic spike that dwarfed championship games and political elections. "She's back" was trending, but right below it the real trends emerged. Why? And the quitter. The narrative was instantly poisoned. It wasn't about a triumphant return. It was about an unresolved betrayal. News outlets, sports blogs, and Hollywood gossip sites all scrambled, pulling reporters from their beds. The headlines wrote themselves, a frantic, chaotic mess of speculation. The prodigal star returns, but is she forgiven? Why her return is a problem for the locker room. The ghost who walked. Has she come to haunt the division she abandoned? The conversation wasn't about wrestling. It was about loyalty, about legacy, about mental health, and about the pressure that breaks even the strongest. She hadn't said a word, and already she was a hero, a villain, a traitor, and a savior, all at the same time. The machine she had famously escaped was now devouring her return. Inside the arena, the show was over, but no one was leaving. Fans stood in the aisles, staring at their phones, trying to process the digital storm they had just witnessed in person. The euphoria of the pop was gone. It had been replaced by something heavy and argumentative. You could hear it echoing in the concrete concourses. A father tried to explain it to his son. "You don't get it," the father said. She was everything, and she just left us." The son, wearing the t-shirt of the current champion, just shook his head. "She's a quitter. She doesn't deserve to be in the same ring." Emergency podcasts were being recorded live from the parking lot. The fan base had just split, cleanly and violently, down the middle. There were those who remembered the promise, the potential, the sheer artistry she possessed, and who felt like a lost piece of their youth had just been returned. And then there were the new fans, the ones who had watched the current roster build an empire on the territory she abandoned. They didn't feel joy, they felt invaded. They felt the past had just arrived to disrespect the present. Backstage, the atmosphere was glacial. When she walked back through the curtain, that sacred space known as the gorilla position, the usual chaos of producers, agents, and wrestlers stopped. Dead. Sound guys stopped coiling cables. Other performers, waiting for their cues, flattened themselves against the wall. They didn't know whether to applaud or flee. The company's COO was there, his face a mask of forced neutrality, his eyes screaming 1,000-decibel panic. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't a long-term plan. This was a secret, held by only two people. He offered a curt nod. That was a reaction. But the words hung in the air, hollow and fragile. She just walked past him. She walked past everyone. She didn't seek approval. She didn't apologize for the chaos. She moved with the same unsettling calm she had in the ring, as if she were walking through a dream. The champion she had confronted stormed past her, shoving a stagehand out of the way, screaming for her producer, "You better fix this! You better fix this now!" But the woman from the past didn't even flinch. She had just made herself the most powerful and the most toxic person in the entire organization. The women's locker room, usually a mix of competitive camaraderie and chaotic energy, became a tomb. When she entered, conversations died mid-sentence. Makeup kits snapped shut. People found reasons to check their phones, to retape their wrists, to be anywhere else. This wasn't just jealousy. It was contamination. To be seen talking to her was a risk. These women had stayed. They had done the tours. They had wrestled through injuries. They had built the division into the main event. And she had gone home. She had criticized the grind they all endured. He had called it a prison. And now she was back, walking into the palace they had built, expecting a throne. The champion was in the corner, surrounded by her allies, voice low and venomous. "She didn't earn this," the champion hissed, just loud enough to be heard. "She didn't grind. She didn't bleed for this. She just showed up." The returning star heard it. Everyone knew she heard it. She simply walked to the one locker in the corner that had remained empty for 7 years, her old nameplate still on it, covered in a thin layer of dust. She wiped the dust away with one finger. The message was clear. "You've been keeping my spot warm." By noon the next day, the media was in a full-blown frenzy. They weren't just replaying her return, they were replaying her exit. They dug up the infamous interview from 7 years ago. Her, younger, her eyes hollowed out from exhaustion and pressure. "You want a character," she had said, her voice cracking. "You want a machine that never gets tired, never gets sad, never misses home. And I can't be that. I won't be that. I choose to be a person, and that person is done." She had walked away from a guaranteed main event, from millions of dollars, from a legacy that was written in stone. She chose peace. She chose anonymity. And now, the person was back inside the machine. The media couldn't reconcile the two. "Was it all a lie?" one headline asked. "Did the real world prove too hard?" another suggested. They painted her as a hypocrite. They argued that her return invalidated the very real, very important statement she had made about burnout and mental health. The legacy she had tried to build away from the ring was now being used as a weapon against her. She was trapped. If she stayed away, she was a what-if. Now that she was back, she was a sellout. She was in an anonymous hotel room, the kind that exists outside of time. The curtains were drawn, the TV was off. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the roar of the crowd and the screaming of the media. The adrenaline of the night had faded, leaving behind the cold, heavy reality of the choice she had just made. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. It wasn't the COO. It wasn't an agent. The screen just said, "Home." She answered the video call. A small child's face, sleepy and confused, filled the screen. "Mommy?" the child asked. Her face, which had been a mask of stone for 24 hours, completely broke. A real smile, a pained smile, flashed across her face. "Hi, baby. I'm okay." "Did you win?" the child asked, a question of pure, simple innocence. She hesitated, the weight of the word win crushing her. "Not yet, sweetheart. I have to go soon. I love you." She ended the call and sat in the dark. This wasn't a comeback for fame. This wasn't for the fans. This wasn't even for the championship. She hadn't come back despite her family. She had come back because of them. She left to find herself. She returned to show her child what it means to finish what you started. Friday night, SmackDown. The show opened cold. No pyro, no music. Just her, already in the ring, holding a microphone. The arena was electric, but this time, it was the electricity of a death row verdict. The crowd was tense, divided, waiting. They needed her to speak. They needed the justification. They needed the soundbite that would let them either cheer her or boo her. 7 years ago, she began, her voice perfectly steady, "I walked away from this. I told you I was done. I told you I was broken. And I was." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "I didn't come back for the money. I didn't come back for the fame. I didn't come back for a championship." The champion's music hit, and the champion stormed the ring, snatching the microphone from her hand. "Then why?" the champion screamed, her face inches from hers. "Why are you here? To ruin my life? To disrespect everything we built?" The returning star stared at her, her expression unreadable. She took the microphone back, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried through the entire arena. "I came back," she said, "because you wouldn't let me leave." The returning star looked at the Titantron. A clip played. It was the champion, from a podcast just last month. "I've beaten everyone," the champion said, "but the world still whispers her name. They still say she was the best. My entire reign, my entire career has an asterisk, and I hate her for it. I hate that she left." The clip ended. The champion was speechless, her anger deflating into shock. The returning star stepped closer. "You built an empire," she whispered, "but you were haunted. You couldn't be the real queen because the old queen never abdicated. She just walked away." The crowd finally understood. We thought this was a story of her return, but it wasn't. It was the story of the champion. The champion had been trapped, her legacy defined not by her victories, but by the one person she could never beat. The one who had walked away. The returning star didn't come back to reclaim her throne. She came back to give it away. She was the final boss, the last ghost, the asterisk that needed to be erased. The loudest pop of the year wasn't a return. It was an answer. It was the sound of history finally, and painfully, closing a loop.